in the deal, and Paul didn't know either. That's just the way it worked. I'm wearing Paul's shirt today. I think he gave it to me, or I might have borrowed it with no intention of returning it. It's hard to say, okay? But that's just the way it worked with Paul. He would do whatever you needed him to do. He was a friend that you could count on any time of the day or night to be there. And he genuinely loved to come and help. It wasn't an act. It wasn't something Paul did out of obligation. He loved to help people. The Bible says in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 13 that we've been called to live in freedom, but don't use the freedom to satisfy your selfish nature. Instead, use this freedom we've been given to serve one another in love. It says the whole law, if you want to get this whole Bible thing down, it can be summed up in one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Paul did that. He was that kind of guy. I know it sounds cliche, but we could say of Paul Dayberry that his heart gave out because he gave so much of it away. He was that kind of guy. He made a difference in the life that he was given. I'm thankful for the impact of his life. Man, as his pastor, Paul was the kind of church member that you love to have. It makes a church great. Because Paul he loved his church. He was ready to help. Paul and Maddie, they came to the Quest Church in our first year. So our church is just 8 years old. And Paul and Maddie showed up in that first year. And so everything you see at the Quest, Paul's had a hand in. He's been a part of, man. And his influence can be felt all around this church. He is always here willing to help. Most of our heating and air conditioning stuff, Paul put it in. He serviced it. He donated a bunch of it as our church grew. I get to the church about 7 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and usually the first thing I do is go around and start firing up the heating and air conditioning, depending on what's needed. And if I turned a switch and one of them didn't come on, I got on the phone at 7 a.m. and I called Paul. And within 10 minutes, he was here. And he'd made sure that the church was ready for Sunday morning, whatever it took. Paul thought about ways to make his church bigger and better. He was always coming by to tell me something he thought of. He'd stop him off. Jim, I've been thinking about this about the church. Have you ever thought we ought to do this or we could do this, and here's how we could reach more people? Literally, I've had pastors from the Dallas area call me and go, this guy was working on my air conditioning, and he was telling me about your church, and he said I ought to call you and ask you what y'all are doing over there. And I go, yeah, it's Paul, right? And then he would come by and tell me stuff he'd seen. Paul paid for kids to go to camp every year. When we had camp time, Paul said, who needs to go to camp? What kid can't afford to go to camp? And there are, bunches of kids at our church that got to go to camp because of Paul Dayberry. He donated money for people to go on mission trips. Anytime there was a family in need, if we just mentioned that somebody in the church had a need, Paul was there. He wanted to know what he could do to help. I'm literally not exaggerating when I tell you that probably 50% of the people at the Quest Church have some link that would take you back to Paul Dayberry. That's the truth. Because he came early in the life of our church, and Paul was constantly inviting people to his church. And so he invited people, and then they invited people, and they invited people, and they invited people. If you went down that link, you would find Paul Dayberry in that chain of the invitations that brought half of our church or more to this church. Our daughters played together on a basketball team. There were 12 girls on that team. And with Paul there, 10 of those families came to the Quest Church. I don't know what was wrong with the other two. I couldn't figure that out. That's just the way Paul was, man. He made a difference. Paul leveraged the life he was given to make an impact. And I find comfort in that. It's good to know that a life well lived still matters, still makes a difference. And Paul did that. And I could go on and on talking about stories about Paul. And I want to give you a chance to share just a little bit, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have just a little bit of open mic time, and maybe a few people want to come up and share. It's Paul, okay? I know we could go on all day long, all right? I know that you've got lots of stories, but one of the things Paul loved about the Quest Church is we keep things to about an hour around here, and we're going to do that today. So those of y'all are wondering, it's going to be right at about an hour, and so we're going to take 20 minutes. There's a timer that's going to come up on the screen, and it's going to count down for 20 minutes. And if you're up here and it's getting close to the end of the timer, then please just, I know you got stuff to share, but go ahead and be seated, or I have to have big guys come up here and drag you off, and it won't be pretty, all right? So if you be respectful of that, because right after that, and family, I'm going to give you time after that, okay? So you guys you don't have to take advantage of this time. As soon as that's over, I want the family members that would like to come and share. So here's how you help us on that. If you'll come stand right behind this microphone and stay pretty close to it, that way our sound person's not having to run the volume up real high, because when she has to do that, that's when it makes all those weird noises, and we'll all go, oh, man, my ears, okay? And so if you'll just stand right there, you can talk right into that mic, and we're going to take about 20 minutes. And so any friends that would like to come up and share a quick word about Paul's impact on your life, go ahead and do that right now, okay? Just come on and take a minute. Anybody that would like to.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ralph Henry, and I had the pleasure of meeting Paul some 30 years ago, y'all. I was at a friend's house in Fontana. I'm assuming it was around Fontana. And 30 years ago, there wasn't much in Fontana. So I don't know how y'all ended up there, family. But, but Mom, I want to tell you, my heart goes out to you, brothers, sister, Maddie. I love Paul and care for y'all. I have a play brother, sort of adopted early in my experience, who was my brother's best friend. Um, and he happened to stay at the house all the time, and my mom finally asked him, "Do you ever go home?" And his name was Richard Earl, and he ended up being one of our roommates. Now, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But I went over there, and this young, goofy kid was with him, and I'm wondering, he's older than me, so I'm wondering, what are you doing with this guy who's about 19? And he's like, "This is Paul Dayberry. Let me introduce you to him," or whatever. And I'm like, "Dude, come here. Let me tell you, what are you hanging out with this young guy for?" Anyway, make a long story short, when I quit trying to deal with the high dollar stuff, consulting in Orange County, California, this is in Southern California, I moved out that way to Fontana because the apartments and everything were cheaper. And I happened to meet this gentleman right here, John Seaton, and I want to thank him and his family, obviously, for being here. But John and I hooked up in an apartment. We would eventually hook up with Paul, would become one of our roommates, and another gentleman who couldn't be here from Arizona, Scott Olendick, became one of the roommates, as well as who else was there, John? Richard Earl was part of it, Paul, and those guys. And that would become a friendship until now, and we all cherish these friendships. What was interesting about that is we were all doing different things, and we never ever hung out together. We all had our own friends. I was working sort of in the healthcare corporate world down in Orange County, and John was trucking there for a minute, and then he got into building houses, and I don't know what Scott was doing, and those guys. But eventually, Scott would move to Arizona and become the vice president of his company. I'm the superintendent at the state school in San Antonio. I would be independent for 20 years. John is a superintendent building houses. My brother, Randy, who stopped in there for a stint, got his PhD, and it was like we all helped each other in that kind of thing. But there was one significant event that happened, and everything that Pastor Dunn says is absolutely right. Paul never met a person he did not know. He would go in, and I love what you said about if he invited one person, then they invited other people. That's what happened if he had a get-together. And these people would show up, and you wonder who in the heck they were. But anyway, one time we went to a rodeo in Riverside, California, and it had to be 100 degrees out there, y'all. And after we sat out there in that heat, we all got together, and I said, "Why are we sitting on the fence watching everybody else compete when we can do it?" I would go on to do a sport called team pinning, along with Paul Dayberry. John team pinned and team roped. Scott Olendick team roped. There was another guy we called Houlihan. He started roping. Richard started working horses. James, I don't know what was happening there. But James was in the mix. I don't want to leave James out and a bunch of the other guys, friends that are here from California. But we went out and realized our dream, but we kept our friendships throughout. Four of us in that group ended up moving out of state. Three of us here to Texas, one of us to Arizona. And I want to tell you this, that in the sense of Paul and his presence, if we believe that the Lord is omnipresent and omnipotent, and he has embraced this church in Paul, then Paul will be with us forever. And so I believe that, and there's a zillion funny stories, like Pastor Dunn said. That, I guess some of I don't know if I could tell. We didn't always go to church during that time. There were places like the Mule Lip that we would congregate, and the Rusty Horn, and the Cowboy Club, and quite a number of venues like that. But I remember times when me and Paul would go to a competition, and we wouldn't have a room, and we'd have to sleep on the floor, Matty, and make it through the next day. Or we would have friends. We actually had a rodeo cowboy who was a bull rider who had won a competition after staying at our apartment. And we would look up on a Friday night, and this kid would be at the door, and we'd like, hey, what's going on with you tonight? Can I sleep on your couch again? This became his lucky couch. That rascal won 3 bull ridings in a row. I tell you, I didn't think we were going to ever get rid of this kid. But anyway, I want to tell you guys that many of you may not know this, but who are part of the Royce City, was it Softball Bulldogs? Is that y'all's? Raise your hand. I know of y'all through Paul, because when he'd be waiting for practice in, I'd hear about that whole story. And the coaches and FFA guys who are here who I've met, I'm telling you, I am so impressed with not only this church and the city, Royce City, because you guys embrace each other as a community, I think, like no other communities that I hear about, and I heard that through Paul, do. And Paul being a part of this family, and I know his family believes this too, is just one very special thing. And from afar, down in San Antonio, I would hear about whether it was FFA events or softball or whatever, and I would hear about what was going on. I think what you guys are doing with the softball event this week, I think is beautiful. And I need to end now, but I do want to say that for him and his cronies from California, we love Paul, we love the family, and God bless all of y'all. Thanks.
Tippy toes. So I'm Regina Brazel, and I'm coming up here on behalf of my very dear friend Glenda as well. And I'm not going to hold it together like he did. I don't have anything too funny, but I do want to say that Paul impacted all of us. He didn't have just one daughter. I'm sorry. But he had several, and they're up here on the front row today. But we loved Paul, and there was nothing that he would not do, including driving Maddie all the way to my house for Maddie to say, I forgot my lipstick, Dad. And he would go back and get her lipstick and drive all the way back to my house. He was just that kind of guy. I can't tell you how many times he's picked up my daughter, or he has picked up somebody else's kid and taken them home. And it didn't matter, just like Pastor Dunn said, he would pick up anybody, do anything, and I was like, Paul, be safe with these girls, and he never cared, and we loved him dearly, and he was a dear friend. He never had a moment where he didn't come to our house, and he'd come early because he knew he had an hour because I would be there. So he would have to stop and visit with us, or the times we've gone to dinner with him or whatever. But he was an amazing man, and he will be dearly missed by all of us, including my daughter, and I know his daughter as well. But we loved him, and we will do the same and remember what an impact he had instead of what we lost.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm Paul's other wife. I met Paul when we first moved out to Grand Point. He rode up on a four-wheeler with Maddie on the front. They stayed for lunch. When he left alone, and Maddie was mine forever. And I want you to know that you are mine forever, okay? I love Paul. He's one of my best friends. He was my go-to guy. And he's touched so many lives, and so many more that aren't even here. And the joke's on some of y'all because he got you to church. So, thank y'all for coming.
I'm going to cut in here because I'm family and I get to claim priority here. So, where do I start? Took me a life to write this, so bear with me. I guess we could look at all this with sadness and loss. To all of us, the community, the family, the world. But Paul would say, oh, to hell with that. Let's go have some fun. There's never a day that he didn't laugh or make someone laugh. He's the happiest person I ever knew, maybe next to my grandfather Ralph. I want everyone here today that he ever made laugh, just raise your hand. You two back there are lying. Now, everyone that he made laugh so hard your slide's about ripped open, stand up. Is there anyone here that he didn't help out in some way or another? And it didn't matter what it was. Could have been the smallest thing. Well, if he hadn't got to you yet, he was on his way. He was always helping someone. It didn't matter when we talked, and we talked all the time. He was on his way to help someone, with a pig, with a horse, with a barn, with a house. Didn't matter. Where are you going? Oh, I'm heading over to help the Suttons. Oh, I'm headed over to help the Greens. Oh, I'm headed over to softball practice, be a coach. He was always doing that. His charity was boundless. Like my buddy Dak back there told me. Like the old lady on Social Security who called Paul and he had a 20-year-old unit at the house. It was broken down. It couldn't be repaired. It was 110 degrees out in the middle of summer. She's getting $450 a month. He drives off and goes to 6 or 7 wholesale houses and shows back up a couple hours later with an old scratch and dent unit, bolts it in and gets it running, and says, here you go, ma'am. He says, now you can pay me $25 a month. Because, he didn't want to embarrass her. He respected her. She had some pride left. She said, I'm going to pay for this. So Paul being Paul said, well, don't mail it to me. You'll get the wrong address. I'll just come by every month and pick up the money. And he'd come by about every 3-4 months and service the air conditioner. She'd give him $25, and half the time he'd leave it on the table, walk out the door. And she always appreciated that, and it meant so much. But We all know Paul. He'd just forget to go by, and that's the way it was. As a friend, Paul was greatest at it. Of anyone I think I ever known. I know many of you can attest to this. One fine gentleman here today told me a story who's now become my friend, and I hope he will long remain that. He said one day Paul came to him and he said, "Man, you're a mess. I know, I've been a mess. You need to get out of here. You need to pack up your bags and you need to leave, and don't come back till you get your life straight. Because you can't do it here. This isn't the place to do it. Go be with your family. Go find yourself again and get your life straight." He said, "Okay, man, I'll be back in a week or two." 4 months later, that man returned to this community. And he said, "You know what? Not a single friend ever understood why I left. Not a single friend told me that I was screwing up my life. Not a single other person that I knew told me to do this. And it saved my life, probably. And I'm a better man today because of it." That's what he wanted to do. He's helped save all of us in one way or another. Not just here, but so many other people we'll never know, you'll never know, all over the place. They're scattered all over this country and probably all over this world. We'll never know how many lives he's touched. My beautiful Miss Maddie, there's little I can say and nothing I can do to fix this. I only wish I could, because I would do it in a heartbeat. You were his greatest joy on this earth. Thankfully, you got your mother's graceful beauty. Our loss is so great, but yours is probably the greatest here. But know this: you never have been or never will be alone. You are Dayberry. We are never alone. We are Lizottes. We are Lesters. We are Greens and Dunns and Hamiltons, Hargraves and Johnsons, Suttons, and so many, many more in this community. More than I can list. We will always be here for you. So please always remember to use us. Don't be afraid to do so. And I need everyone else out here to help me honor this promise. Be there for Maddie. Make that promise today. And if the only answer you have is, I don't know, call Uncle Bobber. Tell her. We'll be there. Mom, we love you. And your baby loved you. We all have to say that. You and Dad raised a great man. Thank you. Your hard work paid off. All that misery and toil. Just on him alone, not counting the rest of us. How St. Shirley you can still walk around, I don't know. I and the rest of this world is a better place because of your son that you created and molded. We love you so very much. And we are here for you as you have always been there and will be for us. And to the rest of the family, thank you. We will be here for one another. This is who we all are. This is how we were raised and brought up. I'm so very blessed to be a part of it. I've lost a best friend today. He is irreplaceable to me. But I guess I'll just have to do what Paul would do. If I can figure out how to turn these pages. He'd go out of this room today and he'd try to make some more. So please honor Paul by doing the same, all of you. Thank you so much for coming and supporting our family today. Please continue that support for Maddie and all of us. And we'll do the same for you. Thank you.
Shelly, why don't you come on? I know you had something you wanted to share.
I'm not quite sure that's fair that I have to follow Jim. Yes, he is. I'm Shelly, and I'm the oldest sister, if you haven't met me. I've been strong for a long time here. Maddie, I love you. I've always loved you, and we will always be here for you. And you can always come to Aunt Shelly whenever you need me. I am so impressed with the community of Royce City. I've made three new BFFs in Kelly and Leslie and Meredith. When my mom and I came, Kelly and Leslie and Meredith were there for us, and we felt like we had another family and never felt alone when we were here. And that it was so comforting to know that we came somewhere where Paul and Maddie have lived and loved, and all of you have brought our family in to become part of you, and we appreciate that. What I want to read today is something that my son, Andrew, wrote. And he put it on Facebook, and I don't know whether many of you have seen it, but he's our oldest son. And this is what Andrew wrote. This past Wednesday, we lost my Uncle Paul Dayberry at the age of 48. He was a loving father, uncle, brother, son, and dear friend. He was a man of God and a true cowboy. He was born in SoCal, but had the heart and the spirit of a Texan. They say the stars are bright, the stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. His star will shine the brightest of them all over the Lone Star State. He is now at peace. The Bible says in Luke 23:43, Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." To live in hearts we leave behind is not to die. And so he lives on in Maddie Dayberry and Grandma and siblings, Shelly, John, and Jim, and their families, his nieces and nephews, and all his friends. And he makes that joyous trip to be reunited with his beloved Susan. And now, with a heavy heart, we bid farewell to Paul Dayberry. And it's fair to say that we will never see his likes again. He was one of a kind. I salute you with a cold beer, Uncle Wheat. And my son doesn't drink, by the way. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels, sing thee to thy rest. And so that was Andrew's